Hello and welcome to my FlossTube channel. I'm Farish, and here I am after a 2-week absence. I had what is better known as the crud for the last couple of weeks. Started feeling poorly, went right to the doctor, did the old COVID test and the flu test, and got negative results for both of those, but that didn't help me feel much better very quickly. You know, it's the same old, rest, plenty of liquids, and trying to find a comfortable place or comfortable position in which to sleep so that you're not coughing your head off all night long. Anyway, really wasn't up for making a FlossTube video last couple weeks, so here I am. And today is going to kind of be a little bit of a mishmash, catching up on some things that have been going on, and just a couple tips. Anyway, I'm going to start with my seasonal PSA about your magnifiers. Magnifiers are wonderful tools for needle workers, and depending on your eyesight, age, and the type of needlework that you do, magnifiers can be a really important accessory for your stitching. But with the time change and as the position of the sun changes, be aware that in 15 minutes or less, an undraped magnifier can cause a fire. It does not take long at all. So when you're not stitching with your magnifier, please make sure that you have it covered in some way. And even when you are stitching with it, just be aware of where that slant of sunlight's coming in, and make sure that you're not basically using your magnifier to start a fire like you would if you were out in the wilderness and didn't have any matches with you. Anyway, it's a reality for more people than you realize, and I just don't want it to happen to you. I mentioned in the last couple of episodes that I went to the Nashville Market in Tennessee, which was actually the first weekend of March. And here it is, almost the 1st of April. Anyway, I came away with several important things. One of them is a new tool that I want to introduce you to. And maybe by now you've seen it in your local needlework store, but it's called the Cross Stitch Buddy Ultimate. And this is a very nicely made acrylic tool that has several different functions. The thing that I am the most excited about is I'm using it to for winding my floss. And they have 3 different measurements here depending on how long you want your floss to be when you're stitching. Now this is for people who like to pre-cut their floss, especially if you're using floss drops, and there are lots of other reasons to be doing it. And by the way, I find that traveling, having my pre-cut floss really is a time saver. And for those of you who are concerned about scissors and whether or not they're acceptable on a flight, having your pre-cut threads sort of eliminates that whole issue. But what I like about this one is that it has 3 different measurements. Let me get my close-up camera set up here so I can show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so you can see here where you can have your floss cut to the length of 36, 24, or 18 inches. Now I use the 36-inch measurement because when I am stitching with the loop start method, I like to stitch with 18 inches in my needle. So obviously, you know, from here to here, that's not 36 inches, that's 18 inches. So one revolution around the cross stitch buddy gives you the 36 inches. So I undo my skein of floss and I, you know, wrap and wrap and wrap and then cut it once So I end up with approximately 8 pieces that are 36 inches long. And by the way, this is a question that has come up from new stitchers, and even stitchers that have been stitching for a while haven't really thought this through. When you are stitching, whether you start with a loop method or not, the number of threads you're stitching with are the number of threads that are threaded through the eye of your needle. So when you start with a loop method and you're starting with that long piece of thread and you are folding it in half, so you have a loop at the bottom, and you're threading these 2 cut ends into the eye of the needle, see my imaginary thread here, then you're stitching with 2 strands. You're not stitching with a single strand, you're stitching with 2 strands. And that's important for a number of reasons. So if you're reading the directions and it suggests stitching with 2 strands over 2, say on a 30 count fabric or an 18 count fabric, then you have to know how many threads you're stitching with. So if you start with that single strand and fold it in half, you're still stitching with 2 strands. So that's one thing I like about the cross stitch buddy. It also has other features too. I really need to move some stuff from my desk here. Let's see. You've got the equivalent of a corner square here, so that you can, from the corner of your fabric, you can be measuring 2 inches, 2.5 inches, or 3 inches. There's a ruler, of course, along one edge. It has some hints here about how many strands to stitch with. It's just a really, really nice tool. So I have been winding my floss to cut it for my floss drops on just a piece of cardboard that I cut for years and years and years. That's what I've done. And so I've sort of this is a little classier than my piece of cardboard. So I'm just really glad to have this cross stitch buddy ultimate. So ask for it at your local needlework store. I know a lot of stores that were shopping the Nashville Market went home with this new tool. So that's one thing I wanted to tell you about. The other thing is that I came home with lots of new fabric. Some of them are new colors. Fox and Rabbit introduced 2 new colors, and I don't know how much these colors are going to really show up on my camera here with my lighting being as it is. But at any rate, I love the way they name their fabrics. This is Dust Bunny. My house has dust bunnies in it. And Inca, I really like that one. And then from Atomic Ranch Fabrics, I came home with Mellow Stone, Vanilla Cream. I already have plans for these 2. Colors that just sort of caught my fancy and just made me say, I want to do something with this. Winter Mint, Joy Lynn. So I'm just really, really excited about the design possibilities with these fabrics. So that was one of my big takeaways from my weekend spent at the Nashville Market. The other one is that I have decided to be a vendor next year. So I am going to share space with Jan Hicks, and I'm going to have some new designs, and I'm going to republish some old favorites, and I am really excited about getting back into that market. So that's my Nashville news, and I don't know, I'm just not ready to retire yet. I've got some ideas, and I'm just can't wait to get them worked out and colors chosen, and I've got all these great fabrics to work with, so some new things are coming. My newest design is for our cruise that's coming up in June. This is the Stitchers Escapes cruise that we're going all the way around the British Isles. So we have stops in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, and Guernsey. And so I don't have a lot to show for it here, but this is what I have done so far as stitching. And really jumping around here. And the reason for that is because I needed to really work out the colors for this cute little blackbird and the Guernsey cow. And that took some thinking. Now I thought that the blackbird would give me trouble. But one of the good things about this is in stitching with Cosmo floss, they have 4 shades of black. And so this color, which, you know, you look at it, your mind, you know, your eye sees black. It's a very, very blue black. So that was perfect for the blackbird. And then I was able to accent the wing and the tail by using 2 shades of one of the purples. So I thought that would give me a lot of trouble, but the first colors I picked out worked. So I was thrilled about that. The cow, however, has a story. So because we're going to the island of Guernsey, I wanted it to be a Guernsey cow. And, you know, I don't know about you, but, you know, if you're not like looking at a cow and you have not been around cows your whole life, like myself, and you sit down to draw a cow, if you're not careful, it can look like a dog or a deer or some other animal that's 4-legged and has a head and a tail. So I did what any good researcher would do, and that is that I went to sources to get an idea of what a Guernsey cow actually looked like. And that was great, except that after the fact, I realized that the sources that I was using in order to make it as scientific as possible were very science-oriented articles and photos featuring the best of the best in terms of milk producers. Now, those of you who live on a farm and if you know anything about dairy cows, you know that a cow that's on their way to the milking shed, the udder is pretty obvious. And so when all was said and done, I had this cow that looked like she was ready to burst. And I didn't really figure out that needed some adjustment until I was completely done stitching. Meanwhile, what I was really struggling with were the colors for the cow, because I have this pattern going that I didn't just want to make it solid color. I don't know about you, but I don't want to sit there and stitch hours and hours and hours of the same color in this big hunk of space. So I decided to break it up by using a little bit of old coverlet pattern. So when all is said and done, I am pretty happy with my cow. The border across the top features the flowers of each of the areas that we're going to be visiting: the daffodil, thistle, rose, shamrock, the lily, so that I've got something for each one of the geographic areas that we are visiting. And I will say that although the Tudor rose is the image that people associate with England, you can't do one teeny tiny. There's just no way that you can design one that's being stitched over 2 in a small area that, when you're all said and done, looks like a Tudor rose. So I actually just use a rosebud, and I hope that the people of England will forgive me for that artistic interpretation. And then I used an Irish blessing as the quote. And then, of course, I've got the Guernsey cow for Guernsey, the blackbird. Again, my little research showed that that's one of the most common birds in England. And so when all is said and done, I have the blackbird and the Guernsey cow, which, like I said, will be initially the commemorative sampler for the people going on the cruise in June. And then after the cruise is over, then I will publish it for more general use. And I hope that you'll like it. Okay, now I have 3 stitching tips for you today, some of which I have mentioned in previous episodes, but they seem to come up time and time again, either as FAQs left for me here on the channel or questions asked in my classes. One of them is how to measure the thread count of a fabric. Now, let's talk about whether we're talking about Aida or linen or an even weave. The concept is the same. For Aida, it's how many squares per inch. For even weave and linen, how many threads per inch. But here's my tip. Don't just count the threads or the squares across an inch. Count them over 2 inches. And the reason I say that is because sometimes when you're just doing it over a 1 inch space, first of all, it's easy to make a mistake. And second of all, let's say if you're counting along and you have, and it looks like it's 14 and a half Aida squares instead of 14, then by counting it over 2 inches, if when you're done counting it over 2 inches, you have 28, then you're going to divide that by 2, and you know that you've got 14 squares to the inch. If you're counting threads and you end up, say, with 61, you might want to go back and recount or count it over 3 inches so that you'll know whether it's 30 count or 32 count. It'd be kind of unusual for it to be 31. But also keep in mind with the proliferation of over-dyed fabrics that the dyer might start with a 28 count linen, and after they dye it, by the time the process is over, it might be a 30 count. It might be 31. It might be some unusual number. But when you are sitting down to start a project, it is so easy to jump right in and be all excited about the project. And, I want you to be excited about it. You want to be excited about it. But there are certain steps that are wise to take before you get going. And one of them is to check and double check the count of the fabric. I wouldn't even go by what it's labeled, because if it's wrong, the person who labeled it isn't the one that's going to have to fix the problem, or suffer through it, or figure out what to do. The stitcher is the one who has to do that. Now, it's sort of like, to me, it's sort of like baking or cooking. Before you start making some big elaborate dessert, you're going to want to make sure you've got all the ingredients. You don't want to get through 10 steps and find out that one of the ingredients you don't have, and all the stores and where you live are closed, or whatever. I mean, there are certain steps that you are going to take before you get into a project like that. And stitching is like that also. And I find time and time again that I read or hear about, or people mention in my classes, these disaster stories that are all preventable if people will just take a couple of steps. One of them is to check your thread count or your number of squares per inch if it's Aida. The other is to check and see if your fabric is cut true to the grain. And that's easy to do. Just look at the cut edges and follow along and see if it follows a thread. And if it doesn't, then you probably are going to need to trim it so that it is square. So by checking your thread count, you'll make sure that your design is going to fit on that fabric. And by checking whether or not it's cut true to the grain, then you will know whether or not you've got it truly centered on your fabric. So those are 2 relatively easy steps to take that, honestly, if it takes even 5 or 10 minutes, it would surprise me. But do those 2 things before you get into your next project. I think you'll be happier if you do that. One of the questions that comes up every once in a while is the question of how to read a chart that has areas that are shaded in gray or some neutral color. So I want to address that, and I'm going to use my Roxy design as an example because it's a pretty big project. And so there are areas in my publication that I have these gray areas. So on the very first page, there aren't any, and you don't need any at that point. But what happens when on the next page, I have this area that's shaded in. This is an overlap. You either stitch it when you're looking at this page or at this page. You don't stitch it twice. So that's the first thing. The reason for it is this. Let me get my close-up camera set up here again. Let's say you're stitching this alphabet. This is, let's see, this is the first page. So I'm stitching along. Whoops, I'm not looking at the right thing here. So I'm stitching along. I've stitched the A, B, C, D, and then when I come to E, I only have part of it. But if I have enough thread in my needle, I want to stitch the entire letter. So what I can do is then just skip over to this page. I can see where to start it, where it's relative to the letter before it, the letter D. I know where to start the letter E, and then I can just switch to this page and follow the diagram for the letter E. If it's something more intricate, then you might find yourself, using both pages. But the main reason for me as a designer to use it is a benefit for the stitcher, that if you were just stitching this and you stitched this part of the E and then ended your thread, and then later on realized when you got to the next page that, oh, well, there's the rest of the E, and I could have gone ahead and stitched it at the same time that I did the first part, had I known there was more. So using a letter is probably the most simplistic way to explain it, but it's true of, up here I've got a leaf that starts on this page and continues over on this page. So it's not an unusual feature of a design that's large and crosses multiple pages. So that's the reason behind it. And the caution is to make sure that you're not double stitching, that if it's shaded in, that means it appears on a previous page. So if you already stitched it on the previous page, you don't stitch that area again. You'll also find that there are pages that will have the shading both on the side and on the top or bottom. Let me find the right page here. So like on this page, this part is a continuation of the page above it, and this part is a continuation of the page that's next to it. Okay, so that's the reason behind having the shading, and it really is a feature that makes it easier for the stitcher. The other thing I want to talk about are marking pens. Now, let me just start out by saying I don't have anything against them. They're great utensils when they're used properly. Let me also say that what I'm about to say does not apply to full coverage. If you are stitching full coverage, that is just a whole nother form of needlework. Frankly, I wish it kind of had its own name, and it's just, there are a lot of things that I will say about traditional cross stitch that just doesn't apply to full coverage. And what I'm about to say about marking pens is a case in point. Marking pens fall into two general categories. One is that they disappear with water or by washing. The other is they disappear with heat. Now, in both cases, the issue I have with them is, I have multiple issues with them. One of them is that they are chemicals, and I just don't see any benefit to your project by introducing chemicals to them. The other thing is that they are known to not always disappear, They're also known to sometimes reappear. Now, with what frequency, I can't tell you. But all it has to do is happen to you one time. And if it's a piece that's large enough that prompts you to want to grid it, then if those lines come back, and again, it's not full coverage, you've got areas in your project that the ground cloth, the linen or the Aida or the even weave, it's designed for that ground cloth to show. And suddenly this grid appears, whether it's months later or years later, that can be a real heartbreak. Now, what causes them to reappear or to possibly not disappear completely when you're following the directions has to do with chemistry. And that is that in the process of using these pens, two things are likely to happen. One of them, every bit of directions I have ever read on any of these pens say something to the effect of not using them for a long period of time. Now, again, needleworkers gravitate toward gridding when they have large projects. Large projects tend to take a while to stitch, whether it's a month or 6 months or a year, or it's that project, and everybody has one that you are so excited about and you start stitching it, and then somehow it gets put aside, and it might be years before you come back to it. Well, that is probably longer than the people in that wonderful lab that developed these pens ever intended for that ink to stay on the fabric. So that's one consideration, is just how long is too long. And again, if you are gridding fabric, it's probably because it's a pretty big project. So that's one bit of caution. The next thing is heat. Heat, every bit of directions I've ever read, if they are, especially if it's water soluble, the directions will say to not apply heat until the lines are until the ink is completely gone. Okay. If you put your work in your tote bag and put it in your car to go stitch with friends or to go to an EGA meeting or go to a retreat, and you stop to get gas, you stop to go to the grocery store, you stop to get something to eat, and you leave your needlework in your car, then that car can reach 90 or 100 degrees as an interior temperature in as little as 20 minutes or half an hour. That's applying heat to that project. So again, the people in the lab coats in the lab that develop these products would say, we don't expect that ink to disappear when you use it in that way. You're not using it according to the directions. You're applying heat to it. So the reality is that the way most stitchers stitch, these disappearing ink pens are a problem. Now, social media, every time this topic comes up, there are loud voices saying, I've used them with no problem. Okay, that's wonderful for you. But the person who's reading that accolade and saying, oh, well, this is a wonderful product, I think I will use it too. The question is, are you going to be using it the same way that person used it? That's where I start having a problem with people on social media jumping in with both feet and saying, oh, this product is wonderful, I never have a problem with it. Well, that's great for you, but can we apply that to everybody? So, at any rate, that's, I just, I just want you to be happy with every moment you spend doing your needlework. Whether it's a tiny project, whether it's a huge project, whether it's something you spend a week doing, whether it's something you spend a year doing it. And I just would like for you to avoid unnecessary heartache, which is why I'm being so adamant about my opinion on this topic, and that is what it is. It's an opinion. Would I use a disappearing ink project? Yep, but not on my hand embroidery. I would use it on something that, if it's fabric, if it's something that I need to mark that that part of the fabric is going to be cut off or covered, if I'm marking a seam allowance or whatever. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the product. The question is whether or not it's good for your counted cross stitch. So, you know me, I've got opinions and I'm not afraid to share them. So, with all that said, I hope that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever you're stitching, that you stitch happy and stay safe. And I'll see you later.